longer they remain, when they rear their heads or they ride through, the more havoc they wreak, the more children are at risk in our culture. I didn't say 50 years ago. I didn't say 25 years ago. Certainly not 100 or 1,000 years ago. In this culture, not only to sabotage their own relationships in adulthood, but to fall into addictive behavior. And I will explain exactly why that is in just a few moments. Now then, the four horsemen. The first one, the adults do not talk about, nor do they model how to work with life experiences, specifically negative life experiences. The adults don't talk about, nor do they model how to work with negative life experiences. Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled, I think is worth buying it just for the first few words. He begins that treatise with life is difficult. And then he develops that with the idea that it is the great American illusion that life should be easy. And life is not. Life is difficult. And we do our children an incredible disservice if we launch them to adulthood without knowing that life is tough. Now, this does not mean that we make them solve our adult problems. That's not it at all. But they need to see you navigating life, doing life in a godly way. Yes, your dad lost his job. That's hard. I'm not going to pretend it's not. But we love God. We love each other. We're going to downsize. We're going to get on a tighter budget. And we're going to be fine. You have given your child a priceless tool. A tool. Yes, your mother and I are having marital issues. Marriage is hard work. I mean, it's just flat hard work sometimes. But we're not going to get a divorce, and we're not going to have an affair. We may get a little bit of therapy or counseling to learn some things to kind of help us along here. But we love God, we love each other, and we're going to make it. You have given your child a priceless tool, because what have you taught that child? I guarantee you, if they get married, there will be rough waters, right? And you have taught your child, when they hit that, which they will if they marry. Well, I remember when Mom and Dad had this bad spot right there, and they pulled through and they did this, and we can too. A priceless tool. The first horseman, the adults don't do that. The second horseman, the adults don't talk about, nor do they model how to work with emotions, specifically negative emotions. The adults don't talk about, nor do they model how to work with emotions, specifically negative emotions. Ladies and gentlemen, emotions are neither good nor bad, they just are. An infant has 4 at birth: sad, glad, mad, fear. It's linked to anthropology. The infant doesn't have those 4, they don't survive. Sad, glad, mad, fear. Sad, glad, mad, fear. If the child's emotions are not validated, now wait a minute, I didn't say that allows the child to do anything they want. We're going to hit consequences very hard here in just a few moments. But if the emotions are not validated, in other words, if the emotions are made fun of, if they are demeaned, if they are discounted, that plants a deep sense of shame in the child. Now remember, last hour we talked about guilt, right? Guilt says I made a mistake. What does shame say? I am a mistake. All right? And so it's this deep sense of shame because I have these emotions. And I don't ever been, grow up. Big boys don't cry. Get over it. That's the stupidest idea I've ever heard of. See, when you do that, you are acting as judge and jury. No one has the right to do that to another human being. Instead of that, I hear what you're saying. I understand you're upset. Your brother broke your favorite toy. Someone dinged my brand new car in the parking lot the other day. But I didn't break their windshield with a baseball bat, and you can't hit your brother. This is the way we work with that. Do you see what's going on? You're telling the child, I know, I get upset too. I get angry too. I mean, that's a normal human emotion. And this is the way we're going to work with that. Yeah, I know your feelings are hurt. All your friends were invited to that party, and you weren't invited. And that's hard. And this is the way we work with that. So what the parent is doing is saying, yeah, you're normal. You get your feelings hurt. You have stress. You have anxiety. You have fears. You have anger. You get upset. Welcome to the human race. I have all those things too. And this is how we work with that. I think sometimes as caregivers, we dismiss it, we make fun of it, we discount it simply because we don't know how to work with it, or maybe that was what was done to us. Ladies and gentlemen, maybe that has been traditionally the way, but it's not going to work in this generation. It's not going to work without some really heavy consequences. All right, we're going to revisit that. The third and the fourth horseman, I dovetail into responsibility. The third horseman is the adults refuse to acknowledge that they have issues. They don't have any problems. They don't have any problems. And when things don't go right, they blame other people. You made me get myself into a bad mood. You made me hit you. You made me, whoa, whoa, whoa. I am the adult here. No one makes me do anything. I choose. Maybe your reaction as a child or whatever was inappropriate, but I am totally 100% responsible for how I choose to respond to you. No one. So what happens if the child does not see the parent accept responsibility for their actions? The child needs to hear the parent say, I'm sorry, I messed up. Because, sometimes people don't want to do that. They think that they appear like a failure. No, that makes you appear huge in your child's eyes. Because they know we mess up before we know. But if the child never hears a parent say they're sorry, the parent is always blaming someone else when they behave in a certain way, what does the child grow up to do? The same thing. They won't apologize and they'll blame other people because those are the early voices they hear. All right? Now then, let me tell you why this is such a big deal. I'm going to run through this really rapidly. We will revisit this a little tomorrow night, but we hit it heavily Tuesday night when we talk about addictive behavior. Human personality is hardwired to survive. It is. Food and sex, specifically. And we will hit that. That's why food and sex are so easy to overindulge in all kinds of ways. Why? They're linked to the pleasure centers of the brain, specifically chemicals in the brain. And if those things weren't pleasurable, we wouldn't engage in it and the species would die. It's just like pig, cow, dogs, any other animal, right? Food and sex. We're hardwired to survive in a lot of things. If I'm out here thousands of years ago and I run into a woolly mammoth, I don't have to have a committee meeting of all my body parts to decide what we're going to do. Okay, right knee, what do you want to do? Left elbow, how about you? Okay, right ear, what do you think? No. Hardwired into me is survival, so what's going to happen? I'm going to fight it or I'm going to run, right? Fight or flee, I'd probably faint. Okay, but you get the idea. I didn't have to think about it. I don't have to process it. It is the way we're made. We're hardwired to survive. All right, that's physically. Ladies and gentlemen, follow with me carefully. The brain is the same way. It too is hardwired to survive. If I meet something in my world, an experience or a negative emotion that makes me feel insecure, unsafe, we thrive on safety, right? That's why I'm going to run or I'm going to fight. We thrive on stability, safety. But mentally, if this experience makes me afraid or this emotion, I don't know how to handle it, the mind has the ability to do the same thing the body does. It will fight it or it will run away from it. Now, why is this so crucial? Why are addictions so prevalent? Simply because in no other culture have there been so many ways to run away from problems and issues, so many ways to self-medicate. I want you to think about it. In generations gone by, there was no way to watch television till you were numb. There was no such thing as an internet. Certainly you couldn't play games on a computer. You didn't have fast food on every corner, and the pantries weren't always stocked with sugar, right? You didn't have telephones. In other words, you had to deal with it. I guarantee you, in our culture, by the time a child is 5, if they don't have some tools on how to deal with abandonment, rejection, failure, isolation, boredom, all the things that life deals us, by the time they're going to start self-medicating it. They're going to eat, they're going to watch television, they're going to play their games, they're going to talk on the phone, they're going to do whatever the mind can do to get away from what feels threatening. And that's why any substance, any behavior can become an addiction. And we will talk about that more on Tuesday night. But do you see the importance of this? Ladies and gentlemen, those of us my age, older, a little younger, this is no time to look at our young ones with disdain that are trying to rear their children and to say, well, you just do this, and this. No, wait a minute. Their challenge is much greater than ours ever was. Ever was. It is time for those of us that are older to grab hands with these young ones that are trying to rear their children and to say, your path is hard. We know it's hard, and we're going to pray with you. We don't have all the answers. We're going to champion you. We're going to try our best to walk alongside you. Much more about all this topic in other sessions.
We maintain that God has been the only perfect parent. Sure he has, but has he had not trouble with his children? Yes, check out Adam and Eve if you want to do so. However, what can we learn from the parenting style of God that would help us with our children today? First of all, is this word agape. When you talk about God so loved the world, this is the Greek word that you would have. What do we mean by agape? Agape is a choice. It's a desire to do what's best for you. I want you in heaven. If you've not experienced this, you will as a parent. There are going to be days that you do not like your children.
That's right.
I mean, that 2-year-old stomps his foot and says, "No!" You look at him and say, you're not as cute as you used to be. There's one down the street we like a lot better. We're trading you in. Well, social services will not allow you to do that. This is the way you're going to have to learn to love, not because of, but in spite of. In many ways, of course, the way that God then has loved us. Now, we need to understand that it's not the unconditional acceptance of sinful or errant behavior. You see, people confuse this sometimes. They say, well, I've got to love this. Agape love stands against any behavior that's sexually immoral, illegal, or unethical. Or hurtful. God loves us. God loves us, but he stands against this kind of behavior. What you're basically doing when you stand against this kind of behavior, what you're saying is, I love you enough to stand against the sin in your life like I stand against it in my own. We're going to talk about agape love many times throughout this conference. You see, we have what agape love on one side and then codependent love on the other side. Codependent love puts up with sinful behavior. That you do not confuse the two, and we'll talk more about that even later. Secondly, as we learn from the parenting style of God, is the idea of access. How did you develop a relationship with God? Did you not have access? Now, you can be there and not be there. Being there physically is good, but sometimes you're not there emotionally. How did you find a relationship with God? Bible study, prayer, worship, whatever it might be. The reason why access is so important is, number one, we need to learn the right to criticize. Well, you say, well, if I'm the biological parent, I have that right. No, wait a minute. You have to earn that right. Now, we're not going to talk about the step-parenting situation, but this is really one of the hot buttons in the step-parenting situation of learning the right. You might have the power to do it, but maybe not the right to do it. How do you do that? How do you get that right? You invest in that child. That means spending time with that child every day. Maybe not, all day long, but sit down, talk with them, maybe do chores together. Watching television might be okay under certain limitations, but many times, that's a waste of time. In other words, you ask questions that cannot be answered yes or no. That doesn't mean you're going to agree with that child, but you're going to find out what pays that child's life and how they think. Next, forgiveness. If you were with us this last hour, you learned a little bit about forgiveness. Our definition was releasing our right to be hurt. Instead of looking at the event, you look through the event to the God on the other side who promised good out of bad. Your children are going to do some things that it's hard for you to believe that they did. If you are a young parent and have young children, I would suggest you not tell everybody that your children will never do so-and-so. that might not be the smartest thing for you to say.
Probably not.
Okay? So they're going to do some things. I mean, what are you going to yell and scream at them, trying to make them feel as bad as you do? That's not the way God treated you. That's not the way God treated you. There are going to be occasions that you need to ask forgiveness of your own children. If you can ascertain they're flying out of formation and they're not doing well as they should be doing, and you can trace it back to a time that you were not the best example in the world, we suggest you apologize to your children one time, especially to a teenager. Do not continue to grumble to a teenager. Well, you wouldn't have made these mistakes. You wouldn't have been this way. You wouldn't have been messed out of shape. All this other stuff that your mom and I have been. Wait a minute. What's that teenager going to say? Yeah, you're right. It's not my fault. It's your fault. Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a time in everyone's life that you have to step up to the plate and accept responsibility for your own actions. Period. Yes, we've had some unfortunate things happen in our lives. Some worse than others, we grant you. Well, when I was 5 years old, I wanted a baby Ruth, and all they gave me were M&Ms, and I've been warped out of shape ever since. Well, too bad. Too bad. We've had these bad experiences. But use those experiences then to not do what's right. It's just not the best thing to do. So sometimes you need to ask forgiveness of your own children if you can ascertain they're not doing well because of your example or choices. This is assuming then that you've cleaned up your life and you've got it right and straight. Next, as we continue reflecting God's love to the child, we'll talk about relinquishment. Relinquishment is one of those jobs, if you do it correctly, you work yourself out of a job. It's not the idea that you cease to be a parent. That's not the idea. But the job description changes. We have 5 adult children between us. We say it's the less voting power, but a lot of praying power. Let's ask ourselves the question, why does a couple choose to bring a child into the world?
I think it's a good question. I used to ask my developmental psychology classes that question at the beginning of every semester. Received some really interesting answers. I'm a child of divorce, one might say. I wanted someone to love me. Another, well, all of our friends were having children. It was age appropriate. We didn't want to be left out. Another, well, our parents wanted to be grandparents. By the time they were 70, they wouldn't hush. One young man one afternoon said, well, we just wanted to see what we could make. All right, those are true answers, but are they valid answers? Ladies and I kind of played with this idea this morning. Keep in mind the thesis, reflect God's love to the child. That's all we have to do. That's our total job. God, I'm convinced, knew the risk when we were created, but he decided love was worth the risk. I think most people, if they have paid any attention at all, when they decide to have children, realize that children can be a great source of joy, but they can also be the single most painful source, or single most significant source of pain in their lives. But people keep having babies. Why? Love is worth the risk. Love is worth the risk. What does God do? We're brought into the world, and what happens? He loves, he nurtures, he disciplines, but he doesn't micromanage us. He releases us to make choices and experience the consequences of our choices. Ladies and gentlemen, that is our job. We cannot micromanage our children. We still learn by consequences as adults, correct? You may drink and drive. Bad choice on my part, but again, you're adults, you do what you want to do. Let's say you do that and you drive, you cause an accident, you kill somebody, right? But you survived the accident. Can you be forgiven of that and go to heaven? Absolutely. But God will not negate the consequence on this earth of what? You see what I'm saying? Just because you're forgiven here, God's not going to wash away the legal system. No, you will be prosecuted because you were irresponsible, you drove under the influence, you took a life. This is the consequence. Do you understand? We do our children a huge disservice if we say, well, I forgive you, so there are no consequences. No, we're reflecting God's love, correct? We're not talking about eternal consequences here. We're going this way. Now, follow with me. That means we release them to make choices and experience the consequences. I would propose to you that a child should be able to make choices about their life about the time they're verbal. Most children's language skill explodes between the 24th and the 36th month. They walk, then they talk. That's just the way they do it. And I would propose by the time the child is verbal, they should be able to make choices. If long-term memory kicks in somewhere around 4, give or take, they won't remember a time when they did not have the ability to make a choice. And it's a wonderful way not only to build self-esteem, but confidence, because it says, I believe in you. I think you're old enough, strong enough, you know enough to make a good choice. Now, let's get realistic. You're not going to look at your 3-year-old and say, okay, Lynn says you have to make a choice. We've got a competitive world out there. What do you want to major in college? Maybe we better get some more of that baby Einstein stuff. No. When they're young, I call it win-win. That's a trite phrase, but it is. You don't care what they choose, but you're teaching them. All right? You're teaching them. Case in point, let's move it into the real world. Let's say you have a 4-year-old and it's lunchtime. And by the way, don't ever ask a child, what do you want for lunch? Unless you are a short order cook or a grandparent, and then you do whatever you want. All right? But if you're the main caregiver and you're asking a child, what do you want for lunch? I just would recommend you forget the charade and move the kid into the master bedroom, because the tail is wagging the dog anyway. No. All right, instead of that, you do this. You know your child likes peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and macaroni and cheese, right? Okay, you have the time wherewithal to fix both. You don't care, but it's a teachable moment, as they say. You ask your child, peanut butter and jelly, macaroni and cheese, peanut butter and jelly. She chooses. And you fix the sandwich, you serve the child, and let's say at that point the child says, no, I don't want it. I'm not going to eat that. I want mac and cheese. Okay, at that point, you do not square out in the mouth yourself, and you don't say, no! You said peanut butter and jelly, and I made this sandwich, and either you're going to eat it or I'm going to cram it down your throat.
No, you don't want to do that. I mean, you'll frighten the child. You mean you won't be
Maybe.
over here?
I know, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, did you see the expression she got on her face?
Well, you probably couldn't miss it.
Yeah. If your children can get you to do that, what? Basically, that reinforces that behavior.
Well,
They're
for a
not
lot
going to
of
look at you and say,
children.
oh, poor mommy, she is upset. No.
Not a lot of children.
The rule, folks, is low and slow, eye contact, pleasant expression. You chose peanut butter and jelly, and that's what you're going to get. There'll be no food until supper time, no snacks in between. Now, what does that child learn? There are consequences to my choices. Bump it up. Let's go to Jason. He is 16 years old, got his driver's license, and he comes to you on Tuesday and says, I got this big date Saturday, and I need the car. Oh, and you say, well, that's fine. You ask where he's going, who is it with, and you're satisfied with all the answers. You say, well, Jason, we can't get the car in the garage because of all of your weightlifting equipment and athletic stuff. You clean out the garage, and you can have the car at 6 o'clock on Saturday night. Well, Jason said, all right, no problem, whatever. You know, he's got it. That's Tuesday. Nothing happens Wednesday to the garage. Nothing happens Thursday to the garage. About Friday, you're sort of throwing your head towards, like, the garage is over there. Nothing happened on Friday. He sleeps late on Saturday, gets up, plays a little pickup basketball with his buddies.
I woke the baby up. I'm so sorry.
Oh, you won't? Well.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, you scared that one, didn't you?
I know. Go ahead.
It'll be fine. Okay, anyway, back to Jason. I mean, he sleeps late on Saturday, plays a little pickup basketball with his friends. About 5:30, you hear the shower on upstairs, and he's showering and putting all that smelly stuff on, and we're shaving off those 4 whiskers, and he comes down, and you want the keys for the car. And you say, oh, Jason, you look sharp. Of course, he agrees to that. This date, I mean, she ought to be thankful that oh, yes, and he's all excited about that. But he wants the car keys. And you said, Jason, you remember our deal, that you would clean out the garage. So let's go see how you did. You go to the garage, turn on the light, guess what? Nothing happened. Jason, you chose. Now, that's a very important word. You chose not to clean out the garage, so consequently you cannot have the car. You're going to have to call your date and cancel. Now, at this point, don't expect Jason to fall at your knees in humble gratitude. Oh, thank you, Mother, thank you, Father, for this wonderful lesson that I have learned in life. I'm sure that it'll go a long ways in helping me be the kind of adult man that I ought to be. You might find, he'll be a little bit unhappy. But what does he learn? There are consequences then to my choices. Next, refuse to relive one's life through the life of the child. Many times I find this, especially with the men, the fathers, that they want to relive their life. They were an athlete. They want their son to be an athlete. Maybe he's not geared that way. Maybe that he doesn't have that kind of interest. Maybe he doesn't have that kind of talent. And again, you're going to see, and especially tomorrow night, you're going to see that children are different. And you need to find out where their talents lie and where they're the best, and then encourage that and see that. And don't try to push them into something that really they're not actually geared to do. Next, then, realize children are not pets and toys to be held on at all conditions. We find a lot of young couples getting upset with their parents because they guilt them into coming Christmas and Thanksgiving. Well, we paid for your car. We paid for your mortgage. We helped you with college. Don't guilt your children that way. Let them make the decisions on their own. Maybe they need to establish their own traditions at Christmas. Maybe they need to establish their own times at Thanksgiving. And so, in other words, don't guilt them into doing things that maybe it's not what they would like to do. Next, let's talk about consequences. We've danced around it, but here we go.
All right, consequences. Let's get rid of a couple of definitions before we go any further, just so we're defining the words the same way. Initially, consequences comes in two forms. The discipline allows consequences, I should say. We have punishment for the undesired behavior and reinforcement for the desired behavior. Sometimes people make punishment and discipline synonyms. Ladies and gentlemen, they are not. Discipline just means the molding and the shaping of behavior, and we do that in two ways, punishment and reinforcement. Now, most of us are pretty good with the punishment. Catch them doing it wrong and let them know about it, right? But ladies and gentlemen, the reinforcement is probably more important. We're back to anthropology again. We're back to survival again. We internalize the negative. For every negative that your child perceives from you, and it can be a paddling, it can be a grounding, it can be even the look, it can be lots of things, there needs to be 7 to 10 positives going back. And I'm not talking about anything monetary. A smile, a hug, a wink, a note in a lunch, hundreds of things. I'm glad you're mine. Hundreds of things. You say, why? 7 to 10? Yeah, let me tell you why. In your mind, picture 100 people, right? 99 of them think you're wonderful, and one of them will leave the room when you walk in. Doesn't matter what you've done to try to resolve all that, they can't stand you. They can't stand you. If your mind happens to cross those 100 people, which one do you stutter step on? The one. It's survival. Why? You feel unsafe, correct? Look at all the wonderful people that think you're great, but that one is the one that gets our attention. Okay, children are no different. Here we go. This is kind of neat. It's a light show, actually, is what it is. I've never done this in strobe lights before. We were in Salt Lake City in the electrical storm. What we did with candles. Okay, never lights.
There's nothing wrong with the lights. It's
okay,
your imagination.
all right, okay. Okay, consequences. Okay, all right. Now then, we're doing punishers. Okay, a punisher is only a punisher if the undesired behavior decreases. Everybody got that? A punisher, this is where your perception of your perception is reality. Your perception is not your child's perception. Let's say you have a child that misbehaves. You put the child in timeout. The next afternoon, next 30 minutes, misbehavior, same timeout. Misbehavior, same timeout. What's insanity? Hello? It's not working. I don't care if you hated timeout as a child. It's not working for this kid. Why? Well, maybe you're talking to the child when you put them back in timeout and they like the attention, even if it's negative. Maybe they like to see you upset if they do it again. Some children really are reinforced when you're upset. Okay, maybe they have a colony of bugs underneath the carpet in the corner. I don't know. It's not working. Teachers make this mistake all the time. Great hearts, but they're assuming the children see the world the way they do. Huge error. You have a child that misbehaves in class. Well, certainly something must happen. They cannot maintain status in the classroom. So they're what? Sent to the office or put in the hall or whatever. Next afternoon, next hour, misbehavior, hall, office. Here we go. The pattern repeats. Pattern repeats. Let's dissect this. What's going on? Probably the teacher is operating from the perception this child likes me, likes my class, likes the kids in here, likes the subject matter, and wants a good grade. Hello. Maybe the teacher should entertain the idea this child does not like me, doesn't like the class, doesn't like the subject matter, doesn't like the kids in here, cares nothing about a good grade at all. When they're in the hall, they don't have to worry with all that stuff, and they get to wave at other people in the hall. And if they're in the office, the school secretary is my mother's cousin, and she gives me candy. Do you see what I'm talking about? This is why you cannot effectively rear a child unless you're in their face, and I don't mean in a negative way. But this business of everybody going to their electronic corners, the days roll into weeks, months, and years. You don't have a clue who they are. You have to have your finger on the pulse. It's called a reinforcement punishment menu in psychology, and it can change sometimes week to week, child per child. That's why you cannot rear children the same way. You just can't do it. I know they say it's not fair. Well, that's right. Welcome to the real world. It's not fair. But you and your brother, sister are not the same people. All right. Similarly, a reinforcer is only a reinforcer if the behavior you're trying to establish either maintains itself or increases. If the behavior maintains or increases. Let's say you have a little 9-year-old girl. She's a tomboy. You put her on a token economy. There's a good book on that, by the way, on their behavior management in the home. Okay. We don't get a kickback. I'm just telling you. Okay. Nevertheless, that means she earns points for making her bed, doing her homework, brushing her teeth, whatever. Okay. And then she trades those little stars in or whatever for a bigger prize. You tell your 9-year-old tomboy daughter, if you earn 25 stars, we're going to buy you a new Barbie doll.
She's a tomboy. I don't care if you love Barbie dolls. I mean, that's not where she is. If you give her a skateboard or a softball mitt, I mean, you might be in the ballpark then.
All right. So you get the idea. Now then, we are not against physical punishment, paddling a child, okay? But if you choose to paddle your child, we would ask that you go through these guidelines.
Now, these guidelines, again, keep in mind and make sure that you're not venting frustration and acting in anger. That's not a good way to start at all. I want you to imagine yourself at the bottom of a circular arena. There are 10 people watching you as you begin to spank your child. These 10 people are divided into 3 groups. First of all, there are 3 people to survive child rearing. They're not perfect, but they had good godly parenting skills. The second group of 3 people could fire you or your spouse, responsible for your job. And the final 4 then are currently rearing children and have godly parenting skills. If you could spank your child while they were looking, in all likelihood, you're not out of order.
Now, more about that in just a few moments, but let's go ahead and insert this next point.
Okay, here again, what we want to do now, we're going to talk about clear boundaries for expected behavior and explanation for resulting consequences. When you tell your child to clean the room, what do you mean by clean room? Out of sight, out of mind? You're going to learn tomorrow night what she means by clean and what I mean by clean, and we're poles apart, folks. We don't see it the same way at all. You use what's called an operational definition. Do you mean everything put in the drawer or sorted? How is it? And if it's a small child, you might say, would you repeat back to what you heard mommy say or what you heard daddy say? So these are what you call very important directions that you would give your children.
Now then, let's go back for just a minute before we actually talk about what we feel is optimal parenting today, okay? If the only way you have to control your child is with sheer force, mentally or physically, you will lose. It's not if, it's just when. What is the goal of any parent? To launch into adulthood a godly, independent young adult that is capable of making good choices without us, correct? Isn't that the ultimate goal? Right. Personally, I think one of the hardest things, if not the hardest thing in parenting, is to help a child internalize good behavior. You know, when they're young, we may feel like we have a little success making them do things. People do things for two reasons: outside pressure or internal motivation, correct? Outside pressure, internal motivation. And when they're young, we probably feel like we have some success, and we do, with outside pressure. But we have 18 short years as parents to get that thing switched, to launch into adulthood a child that is internally motivated. And it's very, very difficult. Did anyone in here have a 35-year-old child that went to worship this morning because they were afraid if they didn't, you would show up on their doorpost and paddle them or yell at them? It's ludicrous to even think about. You know, they don't care what you think. Love descends, don't forget that. All right? They don't care what you think. No. You know, you could yell at them, they won't answer the phone. Email them, they'll block you. Honest. They don't care. They won't care. All right. Now then, if the only way you have, again, is with sheer force, you're going to lose. Jerry and I personally feel the best way for optimal parenting today is what are called natural logical consequences. Technically, they are two different phenomena, but they're cousins. Because of time, we're going to use them as one today. And all the books that Jerry mentioned on parenting on page 4 in your general index, every one of those, basically, except the behavior management one, is love and logic parenting. You can't go wrong with any of them. I think sometimes when children misbehave, we think we have to fabricate some type of a punishment, and so they won't do it again, and we make it too hard. And we become angry and mean and ugly, and we say things we don't want to say. We make it too hard. Most of the time, if we would just step back and think, the natural logical consequences are plenty and much more powerful because the children can't think around them. And I will tell you by personal experience, there are some children that are so tough mentally or physically that you cannot punish them hard enough to make them do anything without crossing the line to child abuse. I know because of my firstborn. A difficult child, mentally and physically. He's 44 now, but if you talk to him, he will still laugh about these natural logical consequences because you can't think around them because they go straight back to anthropology. Why? People will do for what pays. People will repeat or do behavior that gets them what they want. Don't forget that. It is survival. It is anthropology. We have already flirted with these. You know what they are. I will warn you, it's easier to yell, it's easier to ground, it's easier to paddle than it is to use them because you can't react. You have to step back and think. But it is so fun to use because even the smartest kid, even the most stubborn kid, can't think around them. The little girl, lunch, remember? Lunchtime, 4 years old? That was directly linked to anthropology. You didn't have to yell at her like I did. Like Jerry said, well, that's fine. You can eat it or not, but we're not going to have any snacks. And you choose what you want if you want to eat dinner. What's going to be happening around 5 o'clock if she doesn't eat? Anthropology, her stomach, right? It's going to be growling. She's going to remember that the next day when you ask her what she wants for lunch. An easy lesson. Do you see? Jason didn't get the car.
See, Jason then had to call his girlfriend and tell us, hey, we can't have this date because he was irresponsible.
That's plenty
Right.
consequence. That's embarrassing. That's embarrassing. You don't have to say, you lazy bum, you got what you deserve. No. Just let it play out. Now, sometimes you're going to look like a lousy parent. That's okay. Sometimes your kids aren't going to like you. I don't care. Parenting is not a popularity contest. Your children do not need a friend. They need a parent. If you parent correctly, they'll probably come back as friends. And oh, these are so fun. The kid that talks in school, this is so fun to fix. And let's say you've grounded if they're young, you've spanked, you've yelled, you've done all these things. And oh, the kid's just good kid, just social. You just tell the teachers and you show up at school. I don't care if he's a senior in high school and 6'4", and you sit right by him. And he starts talking, you just say, now get on your paper here. And you just stand right by him. And you just trail them wherever they go. It's really cool to do this to an adolescent teenager, and go to lunch with them and try to act cool with their friends. I guarantee you, it's going to stop. And the earlier you do this, the better off you are. If you do it in kindergarten, second grade,
they'll remember.
Rears his head in seventh grade. Remember what I did? It's, oh, mother, please don't come to school. Don't come to school. It takes care of itself. The slam door, that's so fun to fix. That's adolescent behavior. But it's just windy in the bedroom. The door just slams. You've grounded, probably wouldn't speak. You've yelled. That is hysterical to fix.
Yeah,
what do you do?
Take it off the hinges.
Yeah, you take it off the hinges. You say, I wouldn't do that. Oh, yes, I would, and I'd smile as I did it. We have supplied this door for your privacy, but evidently you've chosen not to close it correctly, and certainly that is your choice, but this is our home, and now we choose to remove it. And do it. Children have certain rights in this life: food, clothing, shelter, love, respect. Privacy is a privilege. Using the telephone, the computer, having friends over the vehicle, those are privileges that can be and should be negotiated with. And by the way, while I'm at it, 100 miles an hour, the open-ended statements, I was queen of that until I learned better. Pick up your toys, pick up your toys. How many times do I have to tell you to pick up your toys? You see what that does? That paints you right into a corner, right? You cannot enforce that unless you come against them. Don't do that. Instead of that, you tell your child you may keep the toys that you have picked up by 3:30. And if they're young, they have to tell you where the hands on the clock are. Where do you want them? On the shelves, in the bins? And you don't say another word. And this works great with teenagers and their clothing and their athletic equipment and their makeup. Just do it. 3:30 comes, it's everywhere, you just pick it up. And now you have some choices. Number one, you give them away to charity and get a tax write-off. Second choice is my favorite. You wrap up all these things and give them back to these same children at Christmas as their Christmas presents. Save a lot of money. Or number three, they earn them back with good behavior. I promise you, if you have not discovered this type of parent, it's a riot. It is so fun. Yeah. Good books will give you more examples. There is a better way. There's a better way. Try it.
Let's talk about family caucus quickly. Every child has a right to talk. Now, you model how you want them to talk. If you're yelling at your kids and calling them names and so on, and they turn it back to you, you don't have any recourse, folks. You model the kind of behavior that you want them to have. You bring them together, and you can then make a decision. And again, that's family caucus. Quickly, we're talking about tough love. Tough love says, I love you too much to enable your destructive behavior. The child is flying out of formation and doing some things. Hey, this behavior is not going to be acceptable here. You have to tell them a time it's going to stop. If it doesn't stop by a certain time, they're going to be asked to leave the home. If they're under age 18, you have to find a place for them to go. If they're over 18, they have to find their own place. This is only done in extreme cases. Good possibility you're going to watch a child crash and burn. But what is going on, destroying the family and your marriage, then tough things have to take place. Finally, then, compassion. Compassion is the child's pain in your heart. That doesn't mean you agree with them or have empathy with them, but many times, of course, God had compassion on people. We quickly close with a statement that means a lot to us. Number one, God loves that child more than you do. God loves that child more than you do. We maintain, we've told all of our children, if we ascertain they're flying out of formation with God, we'll pray for them that God will keep them safe but miserable. You say, well, that could be a bad prayer. Could be a bad prayer. But we don't believe that God's going to come along and zap the gray matter, but hopefully he'll provide some opportunities for them to make some good choices. Our children need to know that they need to have God in their lives. Here comes Jack, and he's going to make an announcement.